Okay, conscious inclusion is our next topic. Did you know racially diverse teams report a 35% increase in performance compared to their competitors? Join Dr. Alexandria White for a 30-minute discussion on conscious inclusion, the strategic execution of a practical approach to driving the thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors that allow us to value and leverage differences to achieve superior results. Learn from Dr. White as she shares her knowledge and answers audience questions in real time on how to create significant change by implementing strategies to intentionally increase diversity in the workplace. Dr. White's work in diversity, equity, and inclusion has spanned over the last 15 years and has impacted countless organizations and industries where she continues to specialize specifically in conscious inclusion. So please welcome Dr. White, and this will be moderated by our very own Anastasia Robb.
And we totally missed that Francesca Walker is on here as well.
Oh, hello, Francesca. I'm sorry, that was not in my script here. I apologize. Welcome to the call. I'm going to put the spotlight on you guys and just ignore my mistakes. Have a great conversation.
Thanks, Hunter. I think really the first thing that we should do is actually, would love to do introductions. Dr. White, Francesca, obviously it's so wonderful to have you here in the room with us today. We have a lot that we want to discuss, but important to get you introduced. Tell us a little bit more about you and your work in the space. Let's see, who wants? Dr. I see you're unmuted. Okay, Francesca, go first.
Let's go with Francesca.
We can start with me. Hi, everyone. I'm Francesca, she, her pronouns, and I'm here in my capacity as instructional designer and Think Human. I'm also a diversity, equity, and inclusion educator, and a lot of my work has spanned higher education, nonprofit, corporate, and in addition to that, I'm also a therapist. And so I really leverage that training and that ability to kind of, sit with people, right? And really kind of lean into that empathy to support people on their journeys. And so, I think I'm so excited to be in this conversation because I think that, as the last speaker was mentioning, right, like this importance of being human, I think a lot of people really struggle with this, right, for a variety of reasons. And so really being able to kind of use this work as an opportunity to support people in going deeper and ultimately just kind of, being in solidarity towards this collective liberation that we're all trying to achieve, or at least that I'm trying to achieve. So I'm happy to be here in conversation with Dr. White, and I'll let her introduce herself some more.
Oh goodness, not much else. I love this space. I love inclusivity, diversity, belonging, and of course, empathy. My work spans community activism, social justice, servant leadership, inclusivity, inclusive workspaces. Mothers and women are near and dear to my heart. As an academic, I have worked at close to 6 colleges and/or universities. Mothers that work on campus are my heart. I think they have very different intersectionality. And so that I have created the largest online community for mothers who work on college campuses. It's called Student Affairs Moms. And so I'm constantly talking about how mothers and women can show up back to the workplace and how can conscious inclusion help keep mothers and caregivers in the workplace. So just some of my passions, and I'm so excited to be here with Francesca as well as the Power to Fly staff, and we're ready to go.
Beautiful. And I love that you're both you're like both trained experiences and backgrounds are coming from kind of 2 different perspectives. So I'm really excited to get into the conversation. I'm just going to go right in with that first question. Okay, can you walk us through what you would consider a successful diversity recruitment process?
Oh my goodness. I've got so many thoughts, but Dr. White, I want to,
okay,
lead, how you want to do it? How you want to do this?
You know
Go
what?
for it.
For me, it starts even before you submit the job description. Starts way before then. So many people say start with the job description. I say start with who the hiring manager is and what kind of training has that hiring manager had to help with the job description, to choose the search committee, and to understand the different networks that they might need to be that need to be tapped so that you can get a diverse slate. And so for me, a conscious, inclusive hiring manager needs to be handpicked. A company or a university can do mandatory training so that they can train this first line of defense when you're hiring people. So I'm gonna pause there and let Francesca see what she has.
Oh my goodness. Yes. So definitely before the job description for sure. I think in terms of also crafting that job description, like when we get to that point and we've done all the pre-work, I think one thing that is important to really think about when you're putting together that job description is, to ensure that you're not hiring for fit, right? But you're hiring for value added. I think that's one of the pitfalls that people kind of fall into, right? They're looking to see who fits in with the company and with our culture. And in reality, when you are kind of focusing on who's already in the space, you find yourself missing opportunities to invite other people into the space. And so I think that's an important thing to list as well. I think also, since we're already on the job description piece, people cut it out, start putting the salary range on job descriptions. Cut it out, right? Cut it out. Let people know what you are willing to offer. And in addition to that, one of the things that I've noticed on some job descriptions that I found really amazing is that some of them will put a little note at the bottom that'll say something to the effect of, BIPOC individuals and women oftentimes don't apply for things unless they check off 100% of the boxes. Please, we encourage you to apply. When I see something like that, I'm already thinking, yes, this company is being intentional and is thinking about who is not in the space and what are some of the barriers that prevents people who hold marginalized identities from being in the space. So those are a couple of things that come up for me when I'm thinking about just a job description. I mean, there's so many other things, but already that's coming up for me.
Definitely. And then let's talk about in-person versus virtual. How are you consciously being inclusive for those two different types of dynamics?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are examples where people have been given a full day of events with no breaks in between, meeting after meeting after meeting. There wasn't a bio break, a lunch break, didn't take into consideration if a person has a disability, if they're pregnant, if they're unable to walk across headquarters campus, just understanding that. And I have to add, there is a TikTok that is currently trending. And it is from a young lady who was interviewing for a company. And the company asked her to go through all of these things, do a test, do an hour-long presentation, give them examples of what they would do. People aren't putting up with that anymore. If I'm not going to be hired, why am I doing all of this homework? Why am I giving you ideas for your company and you're not even going to hire me? And this new generation, #Great Resignation, is not putting up with it. And so you need to make sure that I understand you want to get the best person or the cultural ad, but you need to make sure you're not doing extra things, and you will decrease your applicant pool by all of that. And so adding extra assignments. One other thing, make sure that you have a consistent hiring scorecard and rubric, that every applicant gets the same questions and get measured by the same thing.
Yes. Yes. And I need to say something else, right? So, I think one of the things that, in Think Human, we talk about this in our Leader Lab experience, right? But we talk about this piece about, people leadership and emotional intelligence. And I want to say something about emotional intelligence, because to your point, Dr. White, when you were discussing kind of like these long drawn out interview processes, right? And how oftentimes we're not thinking about, what people's needs are in that process and how it might be impacting them. One thing that we've got to be careful with is emotional intelligence, right? And so, yes, it is important for us to be looking at, okay, can people do the technical skills, right? But can they connect with people? Because ultimately this is about people leadership, right? But you want to be careful with that, because you want to ensure that you don't now introduce bias into your process, right? By discriminating against people who may be neurodivergent, right? And so, you want to be mindful of that. And it's one of the things that we touch on in our Leader Lab experience in Think Human, to really support people around that so that you can be intentional, right? I mean, you can always, there's always opportunities to learn more, and there's always opportunity to kind of do repair if something happens. But the more you can be intentional on the front end, the better it is for everyone. So that's one of the things that I wanted to add.
Definitely.
I love that. And that's already actually just sparked some questions from the audience to just, dive a little deeper. I love this one that came in about like, hire, and it goes back, Dr. White, to your point about hiring managers. Are they on board? Do they get it? Because, expediting, when people are like trying to move fast all the time. This is like one of the biggest challenges to this work, is that you actually need to slow down to make that impact. How would you manage, folks that are trying to move really fast? And what's your thoughts or just advice?
Well, the Great Resignation, hashtag Great Resignation, has put a lot of people scrambling. Oh my goodness, I got to get this position filled. And so if you know that, then it should be of the utmost importance to say, you know what, we're rushed. I'm overworked. I'm doing 3 jobs. So what do I do? What is something that I can do? I can ask for help. I can have a clear outline of what I need from that candidate. Scorecards and rubrics are constant. Someone asked in the chat, how do you create them? Me, at my company, Reboot Excel, we help individuals, companies create rubrics and scorecards. Actually, you can find some that are already created on Google for you. Do that. Next, you have to understand that in case something happens and you might not be able to get everything as fast as you can, understand that you would rather get the right person and do it slow than get someone that's going to lead the company. I want to tell you really quick about a company that is paying people to leave, right? If you feel that you are not a fit for the company, they will pay you to leave, because they know that in this rush society, if you don't have the buy-in, you're going to leave anyway. And so there's a company, I'm going to look it up while Francesca answers, but it's a way to, one, I know that things are moving fast. We want to gauge your loyalty to the company. And so ask for help. Make sure you have consistent application materials, and understand that it might not go how planned, but understand the unexpected in that. So ask for help, consistent application miracles, and expect the unexpected. And I'm gonna pass it over to Francesca.
Thank you, Dr. White. So one of the companies that I also appreciate and value is the Neuro Leadership Institute. And they have a process that, they kind of put people through who go through their program. And one of the biases that they talk about is the expediency bias. And so this idea of like, let's move quickly, right? Ultimately results in outcomes that where you are perpetuating bias, even if that's not your intention, right? Your desire to move quickly. The other thing that I would ask, right, is that we remember our history, right? Specifically, I'm talking about the institutional and the organizational history, right? If leadership is saying we need to move quickly, my question for them is, well, how has that worked out for you in the past, right? How has that worked out for you? Have we forgotten? you know? And so to Dr. White's point, in terms of when you don't take the time and the care to really be intentional, you find that as quickly as you got those individuals, you will lose them just as quickly. Because what that also tells me is that you are operating from a space of desperation and from a space of urgency, right? And you're not being intentional. And for me, that's a red flag. For me, as you know, as someone who, you know, might be going through a process, like I'm looking at that. Like, how intentional are you willing to be in this process so that you can get the right person for the role instead of just getting anyone for the role, right? Because that tells me a little bit about how you value the people who are or are not there. So that's kind of one of the things that comes to mind for me.
I love that. That's so good. Thank you.
Before we move on, I want to talk about, I'm always employee focused. While I work with companies and organizations, I'm very employee centered. I've applied for a lot of jobs, got rejected for a lot of jobs. I want employees to know that you are empowered. We talk about what hiring managers want to know, but I want employees and applicants to have conscious inclusion. I want you to vet these companies. I talk about social media all the time. And so hiring managers need to know that people are vetting you. Yes, you have the upper hand. You're able to give a salary, give benefits. But in this day and age, applicants also have the upper hand. Check Glassdoor, check TikTok. There are companies being blasted because they don't have conscious inclusion in their hiring practices. And so if you don't want to be one of those, ask me or Francesca, email me or Francesca. It's about learning and humility, because there's lots of companies who need some inclusive leadership training just for their hiring committees. So just wanted to put that out there.
So important. I want to ask, I know you mentioned some of this, but what would you say, in your opinion, are some of like the biggest or most consistent mistakes that you see people make in the hiring process, or that you see hiring managers make, that maybe they're also like not realizing that they're making? I think urgency is definitely one of those, which we touched on, but
one of the things that I notice is, if you want diversity on your hiring committee, making sure you're not tapping the same diverse people. I still do. And so I would be taxed all the time because I have two identities, right? I have two of those underrepresented identity. I'm a woman and a one of color. Alex, can you be on this search committee? Can you be aware of always tapping the same people? And if you don't have any Hispanic people or Asian people in your company, that's a whole nother problem, right? But if you only have that one person or that one Black person that you have to continuously ask to be on the search committee, that's a whole nother issue. But I want you to be aware of that, of making sure that you're not overtaxing your colleagues who might be minorities. Number two, I think it's important that you understand the different hiring environment now. It is so important that hiring managers, how you hired people in 2019 is not how you're hiring people in 2022. You need empathy. You need social justice lens. In my other life, I'm a professor and I coach juniors and seniors off into the world. This Generation Z, they're coming to you and asking, can you tell me a little bit about your social justice focus and your diversity, and what was your response to the murders of George Floyd? As a hiring manager or a hiring committee, if you don't know those answers, you're in the back. And so being aware, understanding that hiring people now is totally different, and just having a different lens. And so I'm gonna pause, but I've got some more on that.
My goodness. Yes to the tokenism piece, because ultimately this whole piece of tapping the same people, right? You've got your token individuals that you are tapping. Yes, I want to double down on that. I also want to mention that, oftentimes hiring managers will believe that their job is done once they've hired that diverse candidate, right? And so they're really focusing on the diversity piece. All right, I got the person in, but you are not being intentional about what is happening in the organization so that you can keep that individual, keep that talented individual who has said yes to you. Right, as well. So, also understanding the power that person is having when they are entering your organization as well. So I think that's an important thing to mention. I think I also want to mention this piece about, in thinking about moving beyond just a conversation about diversity, when we're talking about inclusive environments, it is very much about what specific behaviors are you doing, right, to create an environment where people get to experience a sense of belonging. What does distribution of resources look like from an equity point of view, right? We talk about this in our Leader Lab experience and Think Human as well. And so thinking about that is absolutely critical. And I think oftentimes hiring managers will forget. I think the other piece last piece I want to say in terms of, what Dr. White was mentioning, candidates will ask you pretty directly, what are you doing in your organization, right? To really stand in what you say that your mission is and your vision is, right? As far as being an inclusive organization is concerned, I would offer that you shouldn't even wait for the candidate to ask you that question. I have been most impressed by organizations that tell me from the beginning, Francesca, this is who we are. This is what we are working towards, but we just want to be transparent about what the challenges are here. Yes. I mean, wow, the intentionality, right? Let me make the decision. Don't blindside me. Don't have me go into a situation where I'm just like, wait a minute, what's going on here, right? And then also tell me what it is that you are actively doing to address the issues that you just shared with me, right? That for me is golden, and we are missing that. We are missing that.
Oh, snaps all around. Yes.
Agreed. That goes right back to your first point of it's about behaviors as well.
Yes.
The fact that they're shows that they're doing it. It's a behavior.
Yes.
I love that. Wow.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, one more thing about this behavior.
Yes.
It needs to be baked into the fabric of how you are evaluating people in the organization. Okay. If the only person that is required to have any DEI competency is the one person that you've hired to be your head of DEI, that is not going to create an inclusive environment. There has to be an expectation and accountability that every person in that organization has a responsibility to play in creating an inclusive environment. And what does accountability look like? And I don't mean in a punitive way, right? Because if a good performance evaluation is developmental, right? And so thinking about where this falls in to that process, if you say that this is something that you value as an organization.
I like to say DEI needs to be in the company's DNA. There you go. There you go.
I'm writing that one down. I like that. Y'all should write that down too.
I love that. I'm trying to pick the next question because we have
You're a tough vibe.
What's the best one? And there's also one that came in the chat kind of about the length of the hiring process, which I think Dr. White, you kind of touched on that. Okay, get rid of the homework, too much of that. How much do you drag things out?
5 interviews? 5? Come on.
Okay.
5. Go for the person in the chat. I want you to think of yourself, a good hiring manager, someone who has EQ, emotional intelligence, usually takes the role of the other. How would I feel in this situation? Usually a person that has to go through 5 interviews, a writing test. Some people had to do a cognitive test. And you don't know for sure if you have landed this position. Do you know how heavy that might be? And so we can't give you a blanket response, that you need 1 or 2 or 5. But we can tell you to use some EQ, some empathy, and understand we're still in a pandemic. And what would you like done to you? We talk about the golden rule, which is treat others how you want to be treated. Let's talk about the platinum rule. Treat others how they want to be treated. And so it's important as you create your hiring search process, just think about it. Back to what Francesca said, just be a good human. Make sure your stuff is intentional. If your hiring process is intentional, it doesn't have to be dragged out. It shouldn't take 5 to 6 times for somebody to meet some people because you've been intentional. You've been intentional with your rubric. You've been intentional with your questions. You've been intentional with things what people have been asked to bring. And it shouldn't take that long. And I'm going to pause.
We don't even have it. That was it.
Covered.
You said it all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. White.
What about, I'm going to ask one more question before we close things out, but what about some of the strategies that you recommend that employers and versus like everyone else within the organization, right? The coworkers can work on their biases to create a more inclusive and safe, workplace for diverse communities.
At Reboot Excel, this is what we love to do. We love to go into companies and teach them about conscious inclusion in reducing biases through hiring. Want to give you some data, want to give you some information. There are 6 common biases that show up in the hiring process. Race, gender, conformity bias, which is groupthink, attribution bias. Me and Francesca went to the same school, so I automatically like her. That's attribution bias. Affinity bias, it's usually most common. Confirmation bias, only looking for data to violate one's pre-existing option. So those are the 6: race, gender, conformity, affinity, and conformation. Know those. You should know those. Race and gender are pretty self-explanatory, but if you are intentional on this work and you want to be a consciously inclusive person in HR, know those biases, acknowledge them, know that everyone has biases. Now the work begins. You should be aware of the hiring process. Is it too long? Is it too short? Virtual, in person. You should also be aware of your company. So when people ask you questions, having that salary posted, that's great. But what about the people who work there? Do a pay equity analysis so that you can see, is Black and brown people paid less? What does your performance evaluations look like? All of that is part of the hiring process. It is. Just because you hired someone, the work still continues. Kind of like what Francesca says. You got them hired, now you got to keep them there. You got to know about pay equity. You got to know about biases and performance evaluations. Those are just some of the things.
We have like less than 60 seconds. I'm gonna say this really quickly. Create an environment where there's enough psychological safety for there to be a feedback loop. The ability to receive feedback is critical. And it's one of the things that we discussed too in the Leader Lab program in Think Human in terms of what makes receiving feedback difficult and giving feedback difficult, and frameworks to support people, leaders, in being receptive to receiving feedback so that we can ultimately create these inclusive environments that we say we want to be a part of.
That we can grow and change, and we can't do it without the feedback. I love that. That's a great way to end. I do want to take, I know we're at time, but we need to give y'all the opportunity to talk about if people want to follow up with you, what should they be reading, whether that's from you or what you recommend, please. You leave us with that, if I can ask you.
Yeah,
I'm going to be quick. Follow me and Francesca on LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
LinkedIn is a wonderful platform. You can ask us questions. We can continue the conversation. I love what I do. I have a podcast. It's called callinpodcast.com. And it's a micro podcast. If you want the blunt truth about corporate America, if you want answers to scenarios. We discuss controversial topics within 15 to 20 minutes. If you're a CHRO, if you're a CEO, a business leader, call in podcast.com. I am open. I answer all my emails, messages in LinkedIn. It has been a pleasure to co-host and be in this space with these wonderful women. Shout out to you, Hunter, for intro. And just thank you to Power to Fly for having me.
Absolutely. +1 on the LinkedIn. I actually respond. Okay. So definitely reach out to me there. I also, if it's okay, I'd love to drop a link in the chat. If you want to learn more about some of these frameworks that I was discussing that Think Human offers, schedule a discovery call with our team and we can talk you through that. Okay. So this has been an absolute pleasure as well, Dr. White. We will be doing this again soon in some other capacity.
Yes.
Yes.
And thank you to Power to Fly for holding the space.